You rose from the burial mound with ice and runes for skin. I said your name, you crossed the dark and let the warmth back in. A warrior's mouth on mine at dawn, unhurried, sure and slow. Like Vikings always kissed, like men who know where they're.
He kissed her at dawn, with the folio still open between them, and ink still drying on her fingers, and 1,000 years of cold barely gone from his skin. It was not a gentle kiss, it was not rough either. It was the kind of a kiss of a man who had thought carefully about what he wanted and had decided, at last, that he was tired of thinking. His hand came up to cup her jaw, slowly, the way he did everything, giving her every chance to pull away. And when she didn't, when she tipped her chin up instead and closed the last inch of distance herself, she felt him exhale against her mouth, like he had been holding that breath for centuries, which she supposed he had. The cold of him had almost gone by then, burnt off by lamplight and hours of sitting across from her, watching her work. What remained was only warmth, the ember warmth she had sensed beneath the surface from the very first night, and which now pressed into her lower lip like a question she already knew the answer to. She kissed him back, her fingers finding the edge of his jaw, and thought, I should not have read that manuscript aloud. She thought, I'm extremely glad that I did. Well, she should not have read the binding aloud. That was the first rule of the Hartwell Rare Manuscripts Room, etched in brass above the iron door, and Elara had known it for 3 years, had written an entire annotated paper on the phonetic dangers of vocalized runes, had translated the warning herself, and understood precisely what it meant. And still, on a Tuesday in October, at midnight, she had let the third line of the folio roll off her tongue, like it was nothing more than a declension exercise. The floor groaned, not the building, the ground. The manuscript had come from a Norwegian excavation near Trondheim, salt-stiffened vellum reeking of peat, elder futhark runes pressed deep into the hide. A binding sequence, call, name, claim. She had understood the structure perfectly. She had simply not believed it was real. She was at the window in an instant, and there, at the far end of the lower lawn, the burial mound the college had always called decorative was lit from within, blue-silver, alive. And standing in front of it, no, emerging from it, was a man. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the ragged remnants of a warrior kit, rough grey cloth wrapped at the waist, a heavy silver belt, bracers on both wrists. No shirt. The lamplight found the ink covering him, ravens, runes, the Vegvisir compass on his chest, the vast branches of Yggdrasil climbing his right forearm, His hair was dark and loose and wet from the mound's cold earth, and his eyes, when they found her across the lawn, were the color of winter lightning. He looked at her, then at the manuscript in her hand. "You called me," he said. His voice carried across the quad without effort, low and consonant sharp, and Ilara felt it in her collarbone before she heard it in her ears. "I made a transliteration error," she said. But defensive, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, something more dangerous. "You read the claim." "I read a phonetic sequence, which I now identify in retrospect as the claim. There is a difference." "There is not," he said, and crossed the lawn toward her. He stopped 2 feet away. She could feel the cold coming off him. Not weather cold, but something older, something with its own gravity, and beneath it, like banked coals, that warmth. She could feel both at once, pushing against each other, and the effect was not unlike standing at the edge of something very high. "Leif," she said, reading his name from the second line of the binding. "Your name is Leif." He went very still. The name landed on him the way a hand laid flat on a drum stops the sound entirely, suddenly, completely. His jaw tightened. He looked at her as though she had done something to him without quite meaning to. "It has been some time," he said quietly, "since anyone said it." She was going to say something academic. She was going to cite the binding's etymology and explain, but instead she said, "How long?" He glanced at the electric lanterns, the satellite dish on the far roof. "Long enough," he said, "that your world is entirely unrecognizable to me. Except you." She blinked. "You don't know me." "No," he agreed, and looked at her with those winter-lit eyes in a way that suggested this was a temporary condition he intended to remedy. "Not yet." "The claim means I'm bound to you," she said. "The claim means I am bound to you. There is a difference." She stared at him. That is the opposite of reassuring. His mouth curved. "I know." She brought him inside. He followed her through the side door of the library and stopped in the threshold, scanning the room the way a general surveys unfamiliar ground. Then his attention settled on the shelves. Rows and rows of spines going dark toward the ceiling, and something in his face shifted. Not softness, but recognition. "Your scholars keep the old worlds here." "Yes, and read them without understanding what they do." I understood precisely what it said. She set the folio on the carol. I just simply failed to believe it. He turned from the shelves. The lamplight hit him at an angle that did something to his face, and Ilara was suddenly very interested in the surface of her desk. "And now?" he asked. Now I believe it, she said, without looking. Sit down. I need to finish the translation. He sat across from her in the reading chair with the careful deliberateness of someone who hasn't used furniture in several hundred years. He was quiet while she worked. That particular quality of his silence she was already learning, and was not emptiness, it was attention. He watched her the way the mound's ivy had watched the equinox, patient, knowing something was coming, in no hurry. It was frankly distracting. She lasted 20 minutes before she looked up and found him watching her hands on the manuscript pages. May I? She said, and nodded toward his forearm. Toward the Yggdrasil branches she could see climbing from his wrist. She needed to cross-reference the rune forms. That was the reason. He held his arm across the table, palm up, an offering, not a gesture. She leaned and leaned in and traced the lines, touching the arm, close enough to feel the last of the cold, close enough to catch the scent of him, dark earth and wood smoke, and something that had no modern name. Her pulse was conducting itself in ways she could not examine. The Vegvisir, she said softly, eyes moving to the compass on his chest, for finding the way through storms. It did not work, he said, in the end. It might now. He looked at her for a moment. That, he said very quietly, is the first kind thing you have said to me. I'm a scholar, she said. I deal in facts. Then perhaps, he said, eyes unhurried on her face, you will find several more facts worth saying before the morning. She looked back at the manuscript. Her cheeks, she suspected, were doing something she would formally deny. An hour later, she leaned across the table to retrieve a reference text from the shelf and misjudge the distance. She caught herself with one hand flat on the table, her face 6 inches from his. His eyes did not widen. He simply looked at her, unhurried, considering, and said nothing, because he did not need to. The air between them said enough. She could feel the warmth radiating off his chest from here, steady as a hearth fire, and she thought very clearly, this is inconvenient. Sorry, she said, and reached past from the book. Are you? He said, very close and very low, that she felt the words more than heard them. She retreated to her side of the table without answering. He watched her go, with the expression of a man in no hurry at all, which was, she was beginning to understand, his single most devastating quality. The clock struck 2. She had stopped hearing it. He was a remarkable research companion, silent when she needed silence, precise when she asked a question, never explaining more than necessary. When she misread a rune, he corrected it in a tone like a man stating that rain was wet. Simply knowing, the academic in her found it extraordinary. The rest of her found it something else entirely. This word, she said, tapping the folio, It keeps resolving as both returned and owed. They're different words. In the old language, they were the same. She stared at her. That's going to reframe the entire secondary literature on Norse obligation ethics. Good, he said. The secondary literature is wrong. She laughed, a real one, startled out of her, and watched it move through him like light through a window that hadn't been opened in years. His expression didn't change much. She looked away before either of them could acknowledge it. There was a heat. At some point past 3, she stretched. She was tired, and he stood, reflexive, as though sitting while she stood were not something he was willing to do. She hadn't expected it. The sudden proximity in the narrow gap between the carrel and the bookshelf was its own kind of problem. You don't have to, she started. I know, he said. He didn't move back. She was very aware of how much taller he was, of the warmth coming off him now. Nothing like cold anymore. Of the fact that he smelled like something that belonged to another century. Something that had no right to be as appealing as it was. She looked up at him, and he looked down at her, and neither of them pretended the moment was about anything other than what it was. Leif, Ilara, her name in his mouth, shaped by the accent, was a different word entirely than the one she had been answering to for 22 years. Lower, more deliberate, like he had been turning it over in the dark of the mound for some time, and had only now decided it was worth saying. She again stepped back. He let her. He watched her do it with an expression that was almost a smile. "You're very careful," he observed. "I'm a scholar," she said again. "You said that before. And I find that scholars, in my experience, are the least careful people alive. They simply dress their recklessness in footnotes." She sat back down. He did too. She very deliberately did not smile. She fell asleep around 4. She did not mean to. Her cheek simply found the folio, the notepads, and the lamplight and his steady presence dissolved into him. She woke to the scratch of a pen. He had moved to her side of the table, not close, but near. His hand was writing something, continuing her annotation in a hand that was ancient and precise and achingly careful. A strand of dark hair had fallen forward. In that unguarded moment, he looked less like something that had risen from the earth and more like a man who had been simply very tired and had at last found somewhere to put the weight of it. She watched him without speaking, and something in her chest did something she had no footnote for. He knew she was awake. She could tell by the slight shift in his shoulders. But he finished the line before he looked up. And when he did, his eyes moved over her face slowly, taking inventory the way he had taken inventory of the library on his first night, deciding what mattered. "You solved it," she said softly, reading the 6 lines he had untangled. It was not difficult, he said, once I stopped translating and simply remembered. Something about the way he said it, remembered, made her throat tighten. She looked at him for a long moment. Leif. That stillness again, match in the dark. Yes, when you were in the mound, she hesitated. Did you dream? He was quiet long enough that she thought he was going to answer. Then, not until recently, when someone left a manuscript near the mound last autumn, a professor, old fool with kind hands. He spoke the first line aloud by accident and did not know it. After that he paused, I dreamt. She stared at him. What did you dream about? He looked at her steadily. A voice, he said, reading. The silence between them was the loudest thing in the room. She kissed him first, or perhaps it happened between them, the way weather happens, without either party having exactly decided. One moment she was sitting beside him, reading his handwriting in the margin, and the next her hand was on his jaw, and her mouth was on the corner of his, and he made a sound very low in his chest. That was not a word in any language, but required no translation. He turned toward her slowly, as though sudden movement might break something. His hand came up and covered her, where it rested against her cheeks, and he pressed it there, gently, deliberately, and kissed her properly, unhurried, warm, with the thorough attention he gave to everything. When they parted, she was slightly breathless, and he was looking at her with an expression that suggested he had been composing that kiss in the dark of the mound for some considerable time, and was on reflection satisfied with the result. Footnote, he said. She laughed, surprised. Footnote? You dress everything in footnotes. His thumb moved across her cheekbone once. That was a footnote. That was not a footnote, she said with some dignity. No, he agreed, it was not. He looked at her mouth. I have several more arguments I would like to make when you're ready. She picked up her pen. I have a translation to finish. I know, he said, leaning back, unhurried and entirely at ease, and devastatingly attractive about it. I have waited 1,000 years. I can wait till morning. Dawn came in grey and unhurried, the way it always does at the end of something. The translation was finished. The folio lay complete on the carrel between them, every line rendered, every knot untangled. A manuscript that had been waiting centuries to be read, and had been read at last by the person who had woken the man who had lived it. Ilara looked at the last page and other pages and felt the particular exhaustion that comes not from sleeplessness, but from having handled something true. Leif was watching her. He had been watching her in the particular way he had, not hungrily, not impatiently, but with the kind of complete and open attention that most people deserve and reserved for things they know they're about to lose. The binding can be broken, she said. She tapped the final paragraph. If the one who called refuses the claim, you are freed. All I have to do is say the refusal word. Yes. She looked at him. The grey morning light was doing things to his face. She had been cataloguing all night without meaning to. The line of his jaw, the way his eyes changed color with the light, the small scar below his cheekbone, that she hadn't asked about it. She wanted to ask about it. She had a great many things she wanted to ask, and they all required time she did not have if she said the refusal word. I'm not going to say it today, she told him. Not today. Something moved through him. He kept it contained, but she was beginning to know where to look. The translation is complete, he said carefully. You no longer need my help. I need your help with the secondary paper, she said. Returned and owed being the same word is going to require an entire contextual argument. And you are the only primary source. That is a practical reason. I'm a practical person. But you kissed a Viking warrior at 4 a.m. in a manuscript room. Well, that was source verification. He stood and she stood. No distance between them. He was close enough now that she had to tilt her chin to look at him properly. And she did. Because she had decided some hours ago that she was finished pretending proximity didn't affect her. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair from her face. Slowly, a single finger, barely a touch, and then let his hand rest against her jaw and looked at her in the way he had been building toward all night. Honest, unhurried, wanting her without any performance of wanting. Ilara, her name, the lower register, that ancient making it something ancient and inevitable. What? She said. I would like to make another argument, he said. I'm listening. He kissed her, and this one was nothing like the careful, wandering kiss at 4. This one was the argument of a man who knew exactly what he was saying and intended to be understood. His other hand found the small of her back and drew her in, and the warmth of him was everywhere now. No cold left, nothing between them but her hands fisting on the chest. And the pale morning light coming through the library windows, and the faint smell of old parchment and wood smoke, and something she would never be able to name that she already knew she would spend a great deal of her trying to find. When it ended, she kept her eyes closed for a moment longer than necessary. Persuasive. I have more material, he said against her hair. And I imagine you do, she said. You have had 1,000 years to prepare. She laughed. His chest moved with some delight, low and quiet and entirely unguarded. She had done that. She filed it carefully. Outside, Hartwell College woke in the ordinary way. A groundskeeper crossing the lower burial mound sat quiet in the morning cold, ivy silver-edged, as though nothing had happened. as though it had not held something extraordinary for 1,000 years, and finally, at last, let it go. In the rare manuscript room, she said, "Stay." One word, no binding in it, no rune, no ritual, no phonological consequence, just her voice, asking. He looked at her for a long moment, with those winter-lit eyes that were only warm now. It did not need the claim for that. "I don't need." "No," she said, "I didn't." She had not yet said the refusal word. She was not going to say it today. She was fairly certain, going to say it at all. "Good night, my love. See you."
Cold earth split open, and he stepped into the lamplit dark. 1,000 years of silence, wearing runes like battle marks. She spoke the old tongue carelessly, the shame, the name, the claim, and something in the burial mound remembered why it came. He smelled of smoke and deep sea salt and centuries of cold. She smelled of ink and sleeplessness and stories not yet told. The manuscript lay open where their fingers almost met. Two people bound by older words than either could forget. He kissed her when the dawn came in, unhurried, sure and slow, as Vikings always loved, like men